So now it's my turn. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
My name is Tony Hajdari. I'm a customer engineer at Google. And I am fairly new to Google. We were acquired, Task Data Systems was acquired sometime around May of last year. So today is going to be a discussion about how CDAP fits into the story of data migration and change data capture.
That's what I'm interested in.
So we'll go through some case scenarios, discuss how we move data from relational systems or non-relational systems for that matter, how we bring them across into cloud platforms like GCP.
We're running. So, yeah, we're running.
All right, so has everybody heard of CDAP? Who here has heard of CDAP? Show of hands. Just a few? Okay. So CDAP is an open source framework for building big data applications. It is Apache licensed, and as a platform, it provides an API. Almost everything that you'll see me do today, you can essentially do through either RESTful calls. There's an SDK that you can utilize so you can build applications in code if you want. There's a runtime, so there's a lot of abstractions that CDAP as a platform provides. And then there's a number of pre-built accelerators that we've included into the tool set. So things like doing data preparation, pipeline studios that we're going to look at today, all the plugins that give you the capabilities of doing reads from databases, all the change data capture stuff. So that's all part of the platform. And then the other thing is, because of the abstractions, you can run this thing either on your laptop, like I will be doing today, or it could be running either on Hadoop or in the cloud, which will be a service in Google's GCP platform. All right, so most of us have probably come across these types of challenges. Why would we be moving stuff off of our nice Teradata platform or our nice visas and move them somewhere else? Well, oftentimes it's cost. Those are not inexpensive. Every 3 years or so, you have to kind of buy new hardware and the next generation. Cost is often touted as one of the major reasons that customers move off of these platforms, but it's also flexibility. You have to decide if you're going to expand this platform. Are you going to keep all the data in there? Are you going to discard some data? How much work do you have to do to get the data to the way it needs to be so that it works well in that typical environment? The other thing is the limitation. So at some point, you're going to decide how much can I afford to expand this platform? Do I now start putting things in different systems? So you'll start creating little islands of information throughout the organization. I think it's pretty clear for a lot of enterprises that cloud is here to stay and everybody has some sort of a strategy to get there. It obviously gives you great cost benefits. You pay for what you use. And if you're building products that you want to get to market faster, you don't have to worry about all the acquisition types of burdens, about getting some sort of a data warehousing platform in-house, getting everything stood up. With cloud options, you can easily experiment and deploy things out there. All right, so what kind of considerations do we have? So typically when we move a whole bunch of data from a data warehouse into the cloud, we're going to be looking at doing some lift and shift approach where we take exports from those databases. So if we're looking at a system like Oracle, and I'm going to be demonstrating data extraction for Oracle today. So if you have something like an Exadata platform, you want to move a bunch of that data into the cloud, typically the very first operation is let me export all those files out to some sort of file system, and then from there, load them into whatever the target's going to be. So for instance, in this demonstration, we're going to be talking about, let's move it into BigQuery. Then, how do we do incremental ingest? So we did our first, the lift and shift, but now we want to capture all the changes. So there's lots of techniques for doing this. Some are schema-based, so you kind of have to figure out, what that's going to be. You might have some flags and tables. You're going to be modifying some things, creating some triggers so you can capture all those changes. And then you're going to be pulling the deltas into the environment that you have in the cloud. Another alternative is change data capture. So every time an event, now that you've gotten all your data into the cloud, as events come into your local system, you want to capture those events, capture them in real time, and then move them into the cloud. We're going to talk about mostly transactional log-based CDC. So there's, again, lots of different approaches to CDC as well. Transaction logs give you the most flexibility because you're not going against the actual database and impacting the database server itself. You're reading from its transaction log through some sort of facility. So in this particular case, it would be something like Oracle Golden Gate. There's other technologies out there that kind of do the same thing. We're going to focus mostly on Oracle Golden Gate because that seems to be the 800-pound gorilla that we're running into all the time. So what does change data capture look like in this particular scenario? So we'll do things like VML operations. We'll do our inserts, updates, deletes. All of those will go into our database. Once that transaction is committed, then all those events become available to us that we can then start consuming. And the technique that we're going to use in this presentation is based on Golden Gate's Big Data Connector, which means we have an additional component to Oracle Golden Gate, which takes those events, goes into Kafka. And we read those Kafka events, and then we process those changes. So again, minimal impact to the database. You don't really have to go and change a lot of stuff about your applications. No need to modify your schemas. And of course, this is going to be the lowest latency option available to you. The alternatives are CDC with transactions, as we've talked. You do have other components available to you in the Oracle platform. So if you want to do CDC using a SQL interface, Oracle does provide something called log miner, which gives you essentially a SQL way of getting all your changes. It gives you a V-star type table that you could go and capture all those events and pull them all from there. The only downside to using log miner is perhaps performance. And you're going to be hitting your database to get those changes. Microsoft SQL Server has a different approach. They do change tracking, and they write all those changes to a different location that you can then go and subscribe to. So it is like log miner on steroids and has much lower impact on the database. But of course, there is always the do-it-yourself method. Right? You can write your own applications that go and use any one of these combinations. There is an open source project called Devisium, and that open source project essentially tries to give you something like a hybrid in between these. So Oracle also has another API that's called Xstreams, and it connects to that Xstreams API to capture all those changes. All right, so the lift and shift approach, if we break it down into the minute parts, is we have our database, and for this particular example, let's imagine that as an Oracle database. We would do an export of those files, and those files can be highly compressed, so moving them into the cloud becomes much more efficient. Once we put them on something like Google Cloud Storage, then using CDAP, we can grab all those files from cloud storage and then write them into anything that we have to sync for. So BigQuery is one of the syncs that would be solving your data warehouse problem. Of course, you can use Spanner, you can use some of the other technologies that are out there, but we'll be looking at BigQuery today. Another way you can get through this is if you have incremental changes. You can, of course, pull your whole database through JDBC. It might take a little longer. It might impact, the way that you put all this data through those pipes. But for smaller changes or smaller tables, grabbing the entire thing across the network with JDBC works just fine. And as we read those records, we can write them to any one of those outputs that you have there on the cloud. So a lot of times you can take data from your database and you can put it into different storage mechanisms for different access patterns. So if you're building applications, especially applications that need to do updates to the specific cells, having that data in a big table is super efficient because you have the same API as each base. So this is how you get to build a change data capture solution using CDAP in the cloud. So what we have here, the demo that I put together, I have an Oracle database. This is running in a VM. This is in Google Compute Engine. On that instance, I've also installed Oracle Golden Gate. With that, I installed the Oracle Golden Gate Big Data Connector. And that connector then will publish its events to a Kafka topic. On the same exact machine, I also have a Kafka installation. So everything that happens in that one box is all on one server. Of course, you can break those components out. So Golden Gate can be separate, and the Kafka can be on a separate instance. CDAP doesn't have to be in the cloud. It can be on your laptop. It can be on-prem. And then you can write to those instances simultaneously. As we're taking events, what we're going to be doing is looking at both DML and DDL operations. So whenever we have inserts, updates, and deletes, as those events come into a Kafka topic, we pull those out and figure out what needs to happen on the sync side. And same goes for DDLs, especially if we have an add column, remove column, change types, those types of things. All right, who wants to see a demo? Woo! Let's hope we have appeased the demo bats. All right, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a table that I have here. So I've got this employees table. I hope that is visible enough because I can't zoom it in this application. So what we're going to do is first, let's see what records we have in there. For my last query, it should only have 118. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that entire table, all the records that are there, and with a simple pipeline, we're going to move that. We're going to do a straight source to sink transfer. We're not going to do any transformation. So the plugins that we have available to us that do this is a database plugin that's going to connect over JDBC. The JDBC plugin, when we build a pipeline, actually gives us the ability to read the schema of the database. Let's see. Query's done. It's 118 records still. Nothing's changed. That's fantastic. So how do I go in and read that data from an Oracle database from CDAP? So what I can do is I have a essentially like a table file browser thing that lets me go in here and look at different sources. I can look at databases, files, tables, in BigQuery. So I've got an Oracle CDC source here, and this is connected directly to the database that I have in that GCE instance. So the table we're going to work with is employees. Then, when I work with the table, it brings a sample set of records directly into the tool. And here I can start doing all sorts of transformations if I needed to. So for instance, if I wanted to change the format of a phone number, get rid of the dot, put in dashes, I have a lot of options here that I can do that with. For our intents and purposes, we're just going to leave it alone. All we care about is we have a schema, so we just would generate a pipeline. Once I generate a pipeline, it actually connects up my E and my T portion. So I got ET, all I need now is L, and I just got to drop in a stick there and tell it where to write the data to. Since I already have it finished, we're just going to run it, and we're going to do it for real this time. So let's create a table. Let's make sure we write it to a place that is not there already. So let's call this employees demo. That's good for me. right, so what this thing does now is it's going to build me I can use either Spark or MapReduce as the processing engine. I just picked the default here, which I believe is going to be MapReduce. So it's going to go, build me a job, deploy it, and run it. And when that happens, we're going to start collecting metrics about that job. So we can see exactly the number of records that have been processed. And as the records go through, we can see the outputs coming through right there. So now that I've got my data in, it's just a matter of going and looking at that table. So I've got two ways of doing this. Of course, I can go back to preparation. And that gives me the visual interface to those tables. Let's close that. And here is my BigQuery plugin that lets me see all the tables in the query. And we wrote it to a data set called CDC, and our tables is now here in Employees Demo. And there they are. So now they're in the cloud. So the same exact data I can look at from BigQuery. So if I open it up here, do a quick refresh. And there it is. So we can see here in the details that it's 118 records. And we can do a quick little preview, make sure the data looks correct. And that's it. That's all it takes to move data from our database into the cloud, into BigQuery. Very little effort. All I did was bring in a table from Oracle, click the button, click another button, pretty much I was done. Okay, so that's all well and good. Now, how do we capture those events that are going to be made into the database so we can get changes into our cloud instance? So let's run our real-time pipeline. So I have a pipeline here, but it's going to read those changes. And as events get written into the Kafka topic, we're going to be able to pick those up. So let's go to our database here. Now let's run this script. And of course, I didn't do something right. So let's do one record at a time. All right. So I added Bruce Wayne, should be the new record that's in there. So let's make sure that that record is in our local database. And there it is. There's Bruce Wayne. And now, after a little while, we'll see that, hey, we've got an event that came through. Now, another thing that's kind of neat is not only can we see the actual tables themselves, but if we configure Kafka here, we can also see the events that get into the Kafka topic. So if I click on my Kafka topic here, I've got a topic for all my change events. There's a lot of garbage in here for all my testing. But the very last thing that is in there should be Bruce Wayne. And that is the very last change data capture event that went into Kafka. So now that it's there, what does it look like on the BigQuery side? So
that was data, not DML, right?
So that is, I created the table ahead of time, so the DDL portion was already applied.
Sure.
So now it's just DML operation.
Yeah.
So let's see if we have our friend Bruce Wayne.
But what you showed on the Kafka topic was not DML.
So what I showed you in the Kafka topic is what Oracle Golden Gate puts into Kafka. Right, that's the event that gets emitted. Okay, now this is running locally here on this project. So this is whatever my test environment. It's in that data set CDC, and it's called Employee CDC. So that record went in and automatically updated the cloud instance here. So now, let's do an update. So this time, I'm going to create one more record. this out. All right, let's add the flash. So that should come in. And hopefully now we have both Bruce Wayne and Barry Allen in there. And again, if we want to see the events as they're coming in, we can always go to the pipeline. Those metrics are always presented to us. We can see how fast things are going. There's ways to look at the number of things, the number of records that are coming in. And now, let's look at that record there. And Barry Allen's up there as well. Okay, so now let's go and update Bruce so we can see that we can actually do a update as well. All right, so the update happened. That was on record. Put the wrong one in. Let's do 11. All right, so here we have one more change event. We can see the events go in. Let's see if our update works. All right, so there's our change. And the very last thing is now let's go ahead and delete a record. So we put in Barry Allen, so let's go and get rid of Barry Allen. All right, we can check this thing locally to make sure that Barry Allen is gone. All right, and locally, that record gets removed, so it's not in our Oracle database anymore. Gone. So that is change data capture in a nutshell. All right, go back to the slides. All right, so there are a number of things that CDAP provides as a big data application platform. So one of the things you get is lots of connectors to go from any source that you can imagine. So if the source is not available, because the platform uses a plugin architecture, you can always take one of the plugins that are there, you can extend it to your own needs. And if plugin doesn't exist in any form, if it's something super unique that you think that would be great to have, you can always go and write your own plugin. All of the applications that I showed you, again, they're all hitting a RESTful backend. So anything that I've done here, I can actually do with RESTful calls just using curl. So all I need to do is just pass whatever the API is expecting, and I can interact with it purely through REST. So the benefits of this is that you can do a lot with your data just using visual tools instead of having to write a whole bunch of code. If you wanted to write a whole bunch of code, you absolutely can. We don't stop you. There's lots of plugins in there that you can actually write Spark and PySpark and Java and Python, JavaScript and Python. But all of those capabilities are there for those users that really want to take it to the next level. All the development is done essentially through a visual point and click, drag and drop type of an interface. Super easy for beginners to learn, so you don't have to be a advanced programmer or a data scientist or a data engineer with lots of years experience. You just need to know how do I visualize my data pipeline? How do I take data from source to target? What kind of transformations I want to do in between? And you can utilize the various plugins that we provide on the platform to do that. It's extensible. Not only can you write plugins, but you can also write services. So if you want to build an application that then serves that data set out using a RESTful API, then those services can be leveraged for doing both inputs and updates and deletes and the like. There's integrated metadata in the platform. So all of the events that go through the platform, so you saw those metrics as we were getting records in and capturing those metrics, all those things get into our metadata system. So if you ever want to go back and see how did that particular record get here, you have field level lineage, so you can look at from a particular table, especially if you're doing joins or aggregations or things like that, you can find out exactly what transformations took place for that particular field and how it got to where it ended up. So you can also produce all sorts of reports. There are custom provisioners that exist. We've built provisions for Dataproc, EMR, and regular Hadoop clusters, so you can just attach to Hadoop clusters and submit jobs there. With Dataproc and EMR, it actually spins up that cluster for you. So this whole time I've been running local, but if I had a Dataproc cluster that I want to run these jobs on in the cloud, I can just spin that up as a profile, and then it will use an actual Dataproc cluster to do that work. Okay, we're at the end. So if you want to find out more about CDAP, the site is cdap.io. There's lots and lots of documentation there and more information about CDAP. And we've done a bunch of these for other platforms like Kudu and HBase. Our colleagues have some great content out there for you to watch. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Good question. Like, so for the Kafka producer, like, can you describe a little bit about like how do you, what is like, sorry, like how does like your Kafka producer like produce like these kind of like sync up like to Kafka?
So the way, so Kafka does absolutely very little. All it does is just provides you a pipe for you to feed events and then pull events from. The tool that actually generates the events into Kafka is the big data connector for Oracle Golden. So you configure that tool with a bunch of options to tell it, where your Zookeeper nodes are, where your Kafka brokers are, a whole bunch of configuration settings, and then it knows how to produce events. So for this particular contrived demo, I just was producing events from a single table. You can actually say, give me, all the tables in a schema, and then it will pull everything from that and all those topics for you. So if I wanted to, for instance, instead of doing a lift and shift or like a JDBC type of thing, I can start with just that and start running a bunch of stuff with the Kafka, and then read all that stuff in real time. So Golden Gate Big Data Connector pretty much handles all that for you. The magic that happens inside of CDAP is we have plugins that know how to read those events and apply the change data capture, inserts, updates, deletes on the section.
So you understand the CDC, what CDC is writing into the message?
Yeah, so every event that comes in, so we can do the same thing regardless of what is backing, the cloud database. So it can be writing to Spanner, it could be writing to BigQuery, it can be writing to Bigtable. What we do is we look at the event, we say, is it an insert, is it an update, is it a delete? And based on that, we know which API to call to make that happen.
No. So you're interpreting what Golden Gate CDC produced.
Yes, that's why this particular plugin is Oracle Golden Gate specific, because there's a linkage between how it produces the data and how to read the data.
And that can change from release to release.
That can, yeah.
But it's a contract with the established, so you don't change the contract.
I mean, let's say they go to like Oracle 20, right? This is Oracle 12. If they change something from Oracle 20 where that gets broken, then, you know, stuff in software always happens, so that's why we're all in business.
Oh, job security.
Exactly. Yeah.
Besides that, like, you covered the CDC and migration to cloud use case. What kind of other use cases do you see your customers mostly using as well?
We see a lot of data integration type of stuff. So a lot of customers that have data that are either residing in S3 or GCS, they want to move that into something like BigQuery or someplace to do a lot of the analytics. Our tool gives them the ability to do that without having to write any code at all. So with data flow, you typically write some Python or some other type of code that you actually build your pipelines in code. This just gives you a way to do that with just a bunch of mouse clicks.
Is there a possibility to configure like batching so the granularity collect so many thousand records at a time in advance, or regroup them to first do all inserts and all that sort of inserts?
Yeah. So can we do that in batching mode and run some logic behind it? Absolutely. Does this particular plugin support that today? No. So I would be able to add that functionality by modifying the plugin so it's aware of that batching, so that I can pass in parameters to it and say, batch it every 5 minutes or something, and then do it that way. But that would require some changes to that particular plugin. Yes.
I'm having a difficult time accessing your links.
These ones?
Yeah.
We'll have to get on that and figure out why that's not working. Oh, it should be. Yeah, we'll have to look at that.
CDAP.
Oh, CDAP. That's what happens when you copy and paste. So sorry about that.
So what is it now?
It is. I don't know, because I just copied and pasted from one of my colleagues. So I need to go back and check that.
They can go to the YouTube channel and find out.
Yeah, there's a YouTube channel that has a whole bunch of that content.
What is the YouTube channel?
Should be.
We can share the links on the Meetup page afterwards,
Perfect.
so you
Okay.
won't have
This
access
is
to
also
it.
Cast App 2. I guess the Cast App 2 has been taken out. So. Yeah, after the acquisition, a lot of these domain names just got canceled. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.